Here's everything you need to know before you go out there and put a warm, big hug around a Porsche 924 and welcome it to the family. It's another Witty 924. Welcome back to the show, everybody, and wow, it's gone quick, hasn't it? Another 4 weeks. Oh dear, I should try to be in front of this microphone more, but hey, busy life, busy things, that's how things roll, isn't it? And today is no different. We're sat here on a lovely Saturday afternoon, beer in hand, and I thought, well, why don't we just talk about the 924 and, sort of put to rest some of the thinking that some may have out there as they're considering maybe diving into the Porsche brand for the first time. And, the 924 is an attractive entry point to the brand. And for those that might want to maybe get a bit of DIY under their belt, the 924 does look like a pretty good platform to get your hands dirty on without really thinking about, am I going to cause a lot of damage? So we'll get into the ins and outs of that. Ultimately, though, for me, it's been quite an eventful 4 weeks. We've done some work to the bus, which is the big family wagon, and did a video on that onto the YouTube channel. So big brake upgrades, looking really cool, doing exactly what they should do. So yeah, check it out if you're into sort of maybe looking at brake upgrades for your car. Then I walked through some of those steps on how you might look at that and what sort of kits you might be considering as you're sort of looking around for your own car. And then what else have we got? The TT's finally gone. Yes, it's found a new home, and very, very happy actually to really see that car go to a decent home where it's, going to continue in having, a half decent life ahead. It was a 20-year-old car and we breathed some life back into the car. So it has really had quite a sort of, I would say, a full makeover on the mechanical side of things. And again, I documented a lot of this on the YouTube channel, just for those that might be sort of considering doing work on what they call the modern classics, which a TT Mark 1 fits beautifully into. And to be fair, it's not a bad car to work on. It's just generally a bit of space that you always have to find, certainly in and around the engine and suspension area, where most of the, I guess, weak spots are. But good learning curve. Really, cut my teeth on, that as a modern classic, and great sort of insight into some of the German engineering that I think, if you trace it back, some of the modern cars are still carrying today, so the underpinnings and so on. But check that out on my YouTube channel if you're into the Mark 1 TT. So that's found a new home, which has meant we have an opening in the fleet. I wouldn't say it's a fleet, but no, it's we have a new car that's going to be arriving literally next week. So I won't spoil the surprises because I'll do a show on it, and something very exciting. I must admit, I think we're at a moment in time where the electric car is gaining a lot of momentum, isn't it? I think a lot of the talk out there is how do people get into electric cars? Prices seem to be becoming a bit more obtainable, certainly as more brands look at entry points into electric cars, certainly across the sort of smaller ranges. And obviously there's a huge amount of interest now that the Chinese brands have. I think from October last year there was a ruling that meant that they weren't able to sell, or the bulk of the brands they weren't able to sell in Europe and into the UK, but that's now gone, right? So they're going to be coming this year in the droves, and I have to say there's some pretty good cars that are going to arrive on the shores of the UK from China, and very, very well built, a lot of great technology in them. They've been beavering away into the electrification, and they've been doing it for as long as Tesla in many respects. So it's quite interesting, some of the brands that are going to be arriving and really the entry points to those cars as well. So, you're looking at sort of the 20,000 mark upwards, where if you look at a lot of the European brands, they're probably more like 50 grand upwards. So it's a significant, I think, opening for people to start really considering electrification for the masses. The only drawback, honestly, is, infrastructure. And like many countries, I think that's really on the back foot. So as long as you're in a position where, an electric car might sort of fit the lifestyle, if it's just sort of running in and out of town, short journeys, not having to worry about maybe the 200, 300, 400 mile journeys, then it looks a good fit. That said, I've not gone for electric, so I've continued to embrace the combustion engine, and I think I will do until we're sort of forced to really push the combustion engine maybe aside. We'll see how that goes, but until sort of the government give everyone the nod, I don't think I'm going to rush to electric. To be fair, look, energy prices are going through the roof anyway, so am I going to add to that by charging my car? That said, fuel prices are through the roof, so I don't know, you damned if you do, you damned if you don't, hey? But that said, combustion engine, and it's going to be something pretty cool. So yeah, I look forward to talking about that. Anyway, on to the 924. So I thought it would be actually quite useful, just in the spirit of the last podcast and for this series, it's more of a deep dive into some of these cars, and really helping people think about maybe all the elements, the considerations as they look at a car that, one, they've maybe thought about for a long time, two, there's a particular brand that they want to get into, in this case Porsche, and three, the balance of maybe learning as you take ownership of a more of a classic type of vehicle, and whether or not you want to get deep into it yourself, or whether you want to sort of scale that out with a specialist, and put money aside for someone to do the work for you and so on. I just thought it's worth just going through all the things that I've gone through on the 924, just to give people perspective to what you might have to think about. And I've done previous shows really about the balance between time, effort and cost and all of that good stuff, but I'm going to leave that aside. This really is just digging into the car itself, and things to consider, even if you're going to go and look at one and you've got a bit of time where you want to spend amount of energy going around the car, making sure that everything is as it should be, what things to look out for, and what sort of things you want to talk to the current owner about. So let's get through this. I've got a nice little list here in front of me, as I say, beer in hand, ready to go. I guess the first place to start, where most people will always be quite concerned on any type of classic car, is the engine and its history, really. So has it been rebuilt? Has it been used? The type of mileage it's done. So I'm going to talk more to the Porsche 924 2-litre engine for two reasons. One, it's the engine I have, so I'm more familiar with that. Two, it's also the engine that sits within the 924 turbo. So if you're considering sort of the top end of the 924 range, the turbo sort of sits there nicely, and the engines carry almost identical similarities, obviously, than turbos and additional piping and stuff like that. But the block and so on, it's the same iteration of how they built the 924 for Le Mans as well, from similar, but obviously lots of things bored out and all of that good stuff to get the performance they did. But ultimately, that's where it was born from. So I think the engine itself is very, very solid. I don't think there's huge amounts of concern out there that you're going to have an issue with the block of a 924 2-litre. They cast iron, very, very robust, can take quite a beating, to be fair. Being a non-interference engine as well, the dreaded things like timing belt snapping aren't going to cause you a whole bunch of headaches, because if it snaps, you're not going to get valves and pistons meeting each other and having a fight. So from that perspective, you're going to be in a pretty safe place to tinker and just get a feel for maybe changing a timing belt for the first time and making sure that you walk through those steps. But when you go to look at these types of cars, of course, having the history, the timing belt is always a good thing to consider, and make sure there's a bit of history of when it was last done and so on. But know that if it hasn't, negotiation of price is good, but you could probably tackle the job yourself. It's not a really painful one to do, and there's so much room within the engine bay. It really is, sort of a delight to work on. Certainly, having worked on the modern classic TT recently, I'm really enjoying coming back to the 924. So, engine-wise, it's a very, very solid block. It's a solid unit to work with and work from. The 2.5 litre variant, which joined later on, is more of a Porsche-derived engine, and that isn't a non-interference engine. So that, from a perspective of a bit more care and due course, is sort of entailed with that type of engine, and there's a bit more to it. And the interesting thing about when you get into the 2.5 and 3 litre engines in general, from 924 to 944 and so on, is they have, because they're in line and because they're so big, they had additional what they call balancer rods, which sort of run either side of the engine, really to counterbalance the weight of the pistons going up and down on the crank. I forget what the specific name for it was, but those shafts ultimately level out the vibrations, so it's a bit more of a smoother ride. And I think the history behind that is Porsche did try to design their own and realised actually this is pretty painful, and Mitsubishi had already had a patent version done which was very efficient and was being used in current engines. So I think Porsche bought the rights to that and applied them to the larger Porsche 2.5 and 3 litre engines in line. So if you start to work on those types of engines, you will find these additional shafts either side, just so you're aware what they are and what they do. Nothing to be worried about, just it's there for a purpose, that's all. 924 2 litre does not have that, so it's a very simple, straightforward engine. The bits around it, so let's get on to some of that, because we'll cover the fuel system, cooling system, oil system, exhaust system, and so on from that side of things. So we have the block, very accessible. The fuel system is generally the pain point that most 924 owners go through, and generally it's because most 924s that haven't had a good life, which there are many, really because they were used and abused, because they were the cheap Porsche, for many years, and they're now at a level where the ones that have survived have generally gone through quite a good set of reconditioning, and those are currently well looked after. Those that are around that haven't had that treatment have probably been sat around for quite some time, maybe hidden in a well ventilated garage, maybe not, maybe a barn find, so I see quite a lot of these coming up for sale that still, I don't know, they're starting to command a little bit more money in terms of what state of repair that they require. They used to be a couple of thousand, maybe up to 3, but they're definitely reaching more of the 4, 5, 6, 7,000s now, even in a really bad sort of state of repair where the engine might not be running, bodywork needs work. So from that perspective, the fuel system tends to be the place that most people want to start, because you want to get a feel for if the engine runs and all of that good stuff. So if you found a car that has been sitting around for quite some time, then the usual checks, get the spark plugs out, look inside the cylinders with a bore scope, just to get a feel for what the condition inside is like, and inside of the cylinder walls and all of that good stuff. Get a little bit of oil into those cylinders, and turn the engine over yourself by hand, just to see if it's seized, and try and get the whole thing sort of lubricated up and moving. This is if it has been sat around for a long time. From there, The fuel system itself is generally like the K-Jet series, and most garages today don't really want to get their hands dirty with it. I have to say, it tends to be more of the specialists or the classic car players that want to maybe help owners on this. But for me, I would say just go and take a little bit of time and learn about it, because it isn't as crazy as people make out. It's actually a pretty cool little system that once you get your head around things, you start to realize where the places are that are the weak spots, but equally how you can quickly address things. So sort of starting from the back, you will find that most cars will have either a pump in the bottom of the fuel tank and a pump outside. Some have deleted or not come with the pump in the fuel tank and gone for a bigger pump on the outside. So there's various versions. Mine has the pump inside the tank and the one on the outside. Again, videos on this, so go and check them out. From the pump, you will then find in the line or in the fuel line an accumulator, which sort of helps regulate the pressures and all of that good stuff. The accumulator tends to be a pretty solid item. It can be a single or a double, and those, again, like I say, they tend to be pretty good. That being said, you'll get a feel for if it's causing you an issue as well, because they shouldn't leak. But yeah, we'll get around that for a moment. As you follow the line through, ultimately the fuel lines themselves are something to look out for, because it runs generally from the back over and under. And what I mean by that is it will go over the rear torsion bar, where your axle is, your rear axle, and then under your body to the front of the car, where the next inline thing will be the fuel filter. And then from the fuel filter, you'll then come to your fun and games, really. Like, this is where the K-Jet and the airflow meter sort of meet together. They sort of help each other out. So the airflow meter has inside of it like a little circular disc, which generally raises up based on the sort of air being pulled, based on the pressure that's asked for from the engine for fuel and air mixture. And this is also where you'll find the fuel distributor unit, which is attached to the airflow meter. And this is where it gets a bit fun, because you have about four pipes that come off for your 4 injectors. You have a further 2 that go to your warm-up regulator, and then you have a further 1 that goes off to your cold start valve. And all of these have got to work in harmony. It's an interesting one, right? So on a cold start, if everything really is cold, then your cold start, which really is a 5th injector, should fire for up to 10 seconds and then shuts off to save the engine from flooding. But that only fires if something called a thermo switch, which is actually plugged into your cooling system, realizes that it's cold enough for that to fire. That's the idea anyway. And this is where a lot of people come unstuck with the whole sort of fuel system itself, because unless all of this is sort of working well, good pressure, pumps working, airflow meter good and aligned, thermo switch, cold starter valve, warm-up regulator is clean, and everything inside it is good, because it has like a little best thing to describe it, it's like a plate inside that again adjusts based on temperatures to add more pressure to the fuel or less, again, as you're driving. So there's a whole bunch on the warm-up regulator that's worth having a read online about. But ultimately, all of this working in harmony together should give you good start, warm, cold, and operation as you're driving. Now, there is good forum discussions around hot starts and cold start issues, and there are good fixes out there as well. I found that one of the easiest ways for anyone looking at a 924 that may not have run but has got fuel and you've checked the engine and it's turning over and all of that good stuff is to take the airbox off, put your hand inside the airbox underneath the airflow meter where you have a little metal disc, and you'll feel it. It's like a metal arm basically, and you lift the arm up. So when you try to start the car, have someone try to start it, lift that arm up slightly, which forces pressure through the fuel system to the injectors, and you will ultimately get a start from the car if everything is working as it should be. Now, that's a way of overriding an issue that you may have with the warm-up regulator. If the warm-up regulator is not playing ball, then basically you will have challenges starting the car. It tick over. You might not be getting pressure through that's high enough to the injectors. They tend to open at about 40 psi, I believe. It's a way of overriding that and forcing pressure through the injectors to make sure that everything actually works and fires. Once that does, and like the engine runs, then you can start doing the fault finding on what component pieces are letting down the system. So this is steps that I went through on mine after having it on jack stands for quite some time, because I was redoing the bottom of the engine and redoing the front suspension and rear suspension, and it hadn't started for a while. So when I came to start it, it just didn't start. So it's a way of overriding it. But generally, the place to start, if you don't have anything sort of firing off the bat, is a warm-up regulator. So take it out. It literally is 2 bolts, 2 Allen key head bolts. Take the banjo screws off gently, which are your fuel lines into it. It's 4 screws to undo it, and then check the internals, because there's a metallic strip that will go up and down. That has to be in good condition. Make sure there's no corrosion within it, and also there's a very, very small diaphragm that sits with the inlet and outlet of the fuel system itself, and if that's damaged, then you won't be getting the right readings and pressure and all of that, and that's where you get a failure. Equally, if it's just dirty, which mine was, if it's picked up, I don't know, something through the system and dirt of some sort has contaminated the flow of fuel either way, then it will have an effect. So just that's worth having a look at. There's rebuild kits out there for like 20-30 quid, super cheap. It's just a delicate job. Take your time and off you go. Likewise with the fuel distributor, that is another area that if it gets blocked up, hasn't been used for a long time, they tend to not like sitting around. They like running and driving. So if it has been sitting around, those things can potentially get clogged up and so on. And again, you can get rebuild kits for those. And these are the sort of steps that you go through as you sort of diagnose why your car might not be starting. But once it does start, and then it finds it hard to start, cold, hot, these are some of the fault finding missions that you'll ultimately find yourself going on. At the back as well, fuel pumps. The in-tank fuel pump tends to be pretty solid. It's usually the outside one that goes. And again, I've done a whole video on this. I replaced the fuel pump, new rubber grommets, new piping at the back to the accumulator as well, and new capping to just finish it all off nice and neatly. And it's been great. Yeah. So there's plenty of really good fuel pumps out there, some good recommendations. Obviously, the original one was by Bosch. The actual original ones that were made aren't being made now, so there's plenty of other ones. I think I got a Moretti or something like that on mine. But all is fun in fault finding with the fuel system. So that's something just to consider. The cooling system is another one that actually tends to be pretty robust. Other than the usual stuff of pipes over time sort of getting a bit soft and worse for wear, you can generally trust the cooling system. Like I said, most people out there will probably have a view that classic cars overheat a lot, and you won't be wrong. Many weren't great, but the 924 has been pretty solid for me, actually. I have to say, a lot of room in the engine bay. It's got fan assist, which cuts in generally about 3/4 up. That tends to happen when it's just on stop-start scenarios, but generally the engine temperature sits between 1/4 and 1/2 on the needle. So from that perspective, it's very reliable. What have I done for mine? Not much, to be honest. I've done the usual G38 change for the cooling, Everything else has been pretty easy. If you have to do a thermostat, it's like right there in front of you. It's super easy to get to, as is the water pump if you want to do that. These sort of things really are, I would say probably one of the strong parts of the 924 2-litre engine as well. So you tend to not really need to worry about that. Actually finding the pipes, I would recommend, if you got split ones or ones that are looking worse for wear, then just go to your Porsche Centre. Honestly, I think trying to find any of that now is pretty hard. There's not many places that I've seen selling like the coolant pipes for the 924. Certainly the 2-litre, that is. Generally if you get the aftermarket companies that do the silicon upgrades and all of that, which I have considered quite often for mine. But in all honesty, you'll find that Porsche will be able to supply that through their classic setup now, and no doubt a lot cheaper as well, which will be surprising for many, but it is. They're doing some great stuff there with reconditioning parts, recommissioning parts as well. So get over to Porsche Classic as a part of the dealer network, and they should be able to help out on the cooling system. Oil system, again, from my perspective, just with the whole engine itself, the bottom of the engine and the top of the engine, the aluminium castings, the gaskets, like most engines will, break down over time. So the bottom gasket is a bit of a pain because you do have to remove a whole bunch of stuff to ultimately take the oil sump off. And again, I've done a whole video on this. It's the front suspension, front cross member, steering rack, which I all recondition, refurbish for mine. So I did it as a part of, right, I'm going to rebuild the front suspension, redo that. And again, parts are not expensive. You can get lower wishbones for 30, 40 quid with all the rubber, all the bushings intact. So you literally just plug and play when you go through these steps. And it's a chance to, just sort of clean up around there and, give things a bit more of a paint again, give them a bit of lease of life. And from that perspective, the oil sump, I think it's about 16, 17 Allen head bolts that come out. And then you can pretty easily just, get the gasket done. And the oil pickup is, I think, one of those things that if you're experiencing probably a little bit of lag in your oil consumption or heat, there's a couple of gauges, right? So there's oil pressure and oil temperature that you have on the 924 that gives you a sort of good indicator of how things are going on in there. And sometimes, if depending on how bad the life of the engine or how bad it's been treated over its life, you might have to replace that oil pickup. Mine was pretty clean and working as it should, so didn't really see a need to change that. It looked all pretty good from top to bottom, but it's a bit of a painful job just getting that bottom part off of the oil sump off. The top is super easy. I mean, that's like a 10-minute job, literally. I think it's 8 Allen head bolts, 2 gaskets, on and off, screw down. Nice and easy. So oil system overall tends to be very reliable, robust. I would say, where else would the oil leak from that could maybe cause a little bit of a challenge? So at the top on the camshaft, there's a oil seal there that I had leak. Really, I should have replaced it when I did the timing belt, but I didn't because it was doing its job. And then, you go for a drive or two and it gives up the ghost. But from that perspective, I think it was probably a half-hour job or so because you have to remove just the timing belt off and then the pulley and pull it out and new one on. At the bottom of the engine, you've got rear main seal and front seal. The rear main seal, a little bit of a bigger job, and you generally, you have to pull the torque tube back. It's also a good time to do the clutch as well. So I think with most cars, if you're going to be doing a clutch of some sort, the rear main seal tends to be done at the same time. But no nasty sort of surprises or headaches or anything that is of concern. It's literally a seal in and out, and then clutch back in and all of that good stuff. So those are generally the places that the engine leaks from. Oh, and there's one potentially at the back of the engine, which is where the distributor is. You'll get the telltale signs, like I say, there's so much room in the engine, you'll get to see where all these leaks potentially can come from pretty easily. Again, pretty easy job to remove that and then just add in new gasket and so on. So oil system tends to be pretty robust. I think there's when you take the camshaft cover off as well, or the rocker cover, there's a bar that runs across the top of the cam, which is like an oil feed. Just run your eyes over that just to make sure that everything is working as it is and there's no holes that are clogged, and because there is like potential for that to not be as efficient as it should be. So yeah, just something to be aware of there. Exhaust system, like on any of these cars over time, the heat shielding can rust out. So something, as you look to the engine bay where the headers are on the left hand side, gets extremely hot. So you will see potential paint flaking on the left hand side of the strut tower just because of the heat that gets generated from the header there. There should be a cover that sits between where the spark plugs sit in and the headers. Most of these on most cars have probably disintegrated, or if there's been some sort of work done, just never put back on. One top tip which I've done with mine is I've just got heat insulation around my spark plug wires and spark plugs, just because there is a good amount of heat that gets kicked out from the headers there. I've been searching for actually one of these sort of protector plates, but again, these sort of things don't tend to be out there for so much on a 37-year-old car, 38 maybe. So yeah, just something to be aware of. But as you go down through the exhaust system, there's a heat shield that sits just at the front as the headers, as you come off the headers, the downpipe. That one tends to be, pretty okay, but again, can, depending on the car's history, will most likely be rusted of some sort. And then as you go back through the car, just the rear has a heat shield as well there. It's just like the general things with exhaust, just make sure that they're doing the job they should be doing. I think Danska's the main supplier for new ones of the 924. I was very fortunate for me. I found a Jan Speed that did the job pretty well, and it was never used, brand new centre pipe and back. So generally they come in three parts. So it's a front, centre and rear silencer. Overall, the exhaust system is very easy to work on once you've got it on jack stands. Again, everything's very accessible, nothing too crazy. If you've got an old one that's been sat around, you most likely need to cut it off and get all the new hardware just to add a new system back on. As we now go on to sort of the drivetrain, gearbox, drive shafts and so on. Again, very easy to get access to all of this. The gearbox sits right out the back by itself, attached to the torque tube, which runs down the centre of the car to the engine. So the great design from Porsche around that 50-50 weight distribution, making sure that you got something right out over the back wheels, something over the front wheels. The engine actually sits mainly behind the front wheels. So when you look at the position of the engine, I think cylinder 1, maybe a little bit of cylinder 2 sits in line with the strut towers, and then the rest sits back from that towards the passenger area. In that perspective, it just a great place for the engine to be. So some great thinking, great design back in the 70s there when they did this. Gearbox right out, and it literally is right out there. It's banging against the spare wheel, which is cut down into a shape of the boot, so they couldn't put it any further because you had a big part of the boot hanging down there. But very accessible, drive shafts, very easy to remove. Just trying to think gearbox wise, I think you'll find that the gearbox screws for emptying and topping up gearbox oil will be a pain. They tend to be seized. So there's a special tool, I think it's like a 17mm sort of Allen head tool that just allows you to open these things up properly. But remember, always do the top filler bolt before you undo the one that lets everything out, just so you can make sure you get the chance to fill it up again. Otherwise, there's a linkage that sits on the top of the gearbox that has the two, basically has the link rod that runs to your gear stick inside, runs the length of the car. That linkage can get a bit sloppy, so there's some aftermarket stuff that actually allows you to have a good setup going forward, and there's a couple of tweaks you can do there. Likewise, the gear stick inside, and I've talked about this on my videos, that there's a ball joint and a pin that the bar slots onto. So if you feel like you've got a bit of a sloppy gear change, then generally those two parts are the ones to change. And then everything, feels as it should. So drivetrain wise, I had the torque tube reconditioned, so painted on the outside, inside the bearings done. There's 4 bearings that sit within the torque tube, and sometimes these start to go, like any bearing, you get the sort of the groan, the hum through the transmission. It's an interesting one, right? Because you will hear everything anyway through the transmission. These cars, it's a part of their character where you actually have everything with you in every, feel of motion, gear change, drivability. You'll hear everything going on, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, it's a part of the theatre of these cars. So from that perspective, the gearbox tends to be pretty robust. I've not heard horror stories. Not too sure what the gearbox might start to look like when you increase power, like the turbos and stuff, but generally with the 924 it's very, very robust, no issues other than the linkage. Like I say, with drive shafts as well, they're very good as well, so I haven't had any issues in there, touch wood. Suspension, this is where you will expect to do any type of work on an old car, I think, because as with many suspension components, they are generally full of rubber, so as the rubber breaks down, that's when you get the sloppy feel and the banging, the bumping, all of that good stuff. So I think there's good discussions around whether you can consider poly bushing all of this. These cars are low, they're set up in a way that is very sporty. I mean, that's just what they were built for. They're that sort of era. Now I've not opted for poly bushes, I've kept them original, but I did go for Gaz gold coilover kit, and that's coilovers on the front and shocks on the rear, because you've got a torsion bar on the rear. And from that perspective, it just allowed me to just tweak with the height setting at the front. You can re-index the torsion bar on the rear to lower the car, and you've got eccentric plates there that you can play around with. I've not really touched that, to be honest. It's a low car, like I said. So from that perspective, you don't really have to get your hands too dirty on that unless you really want to drop these things. As people do it. It looks cool. On British roads, you probably spend more time banging your head on the roof and banging potholes and the bottom of your car if you did it. So to be honest, it wasn't something I was looking for. I just wanted better control and better steering feel. So the coilovers on the front really gave me that, along with the new wishbones and bushes that were all standard. And the car drives fantastically well. And after I had all the work done, got it professionally four-wheel aligned by a Porsche specialist, actually, because you need a special tool on the rear to just line things up on the rear wheels, and it drives fantastic. Really, really happy with it. And yeah, I don't think I would change anything else. So if you're considering maybe a 924 to turn into a track day car, then yeah, go for it. Get poly bushes, get all the coilovers, get everything set up low, bang bang bang, because you will have an absolute blast on a track that's flat. You will be able to corner like it's on rails and have all of those things working the way they should. So that side of things, the suspension is generally super easy to work on as well. You really do not need any sort of specialist tools to do it. The usual tools for struts at the top. If you're removing the whole thing and replacing them with new sort of coilovers, then yeah, you really don't need anything too specialist to get that work done. Most of the stuff I've done, in fact 99% of the stuff I've done on the driveway, so it just gives you a bit of perspective on how easy these cars are to work on, which is sort of testament back to the day, isn't it? 70s, 80s that these cars were designed and built. Brake system, like any brake system, I think you will come to a point where things become corroded and worn down. It's like any of the pipe work, just get your eyes on it as you're looking at this stuff, certainly under the car, because that's where the pain will be if you have to replace the piping. The piping from the caliper through to the main piping, that's where you'll find most of the corrosion. So I changed mine for steel braided pipes, which I did 2017. Never had to really think about anything since. They're super smart, super reliable, and yeah, highly recommend it. I think there's guys out there doing specialist kits for like 40-50 quid. So for all four corners, steel braid, upgrade, and jobs are good. And like any brake system, the reservoir and booster, making sure all that isn't leaking and is looking the right color. That's the main thing. And just doing the regular brake change every couple of years, just to make sure it's all performing as it should be. So front calipers, discs tend to be pretty robust and solid. You can get big brake upgrades if you're going for the 5-stud pattern. On your hubs, I've got 4-stud patterns, so I've never done it. They've performed really well for me, so I don't really need anything too overkill. These cars aren't necessarily heavy, so there's no issue there. The ones that are a bit of a pain, because if you don't like drum brakes, that's what the rears are, and certainly on the 924 2-litre. And again, it's just sort of cutting your teeth on this stuff. So cylinders, within the brake system itself, having to change them. You might have to get sort of new backing plates, because generally they have fallen to pieces. And then the shoes themselves, and just sort of balancing the setup with the spring setup and all of that good stuff. I had to also redo handbrake cable, which comes in 2 pieces. So I think the long bit goes to the left and the short bit goes to the right. I may have that completely the wrong way around. It was so long ago that I did it. Handbrake's down by the right hand of your seat, so it's not in the middle like normal cars, it's on the right, like Aston's as well. So you'll find that the handbrake cable comes out the right hand side of the car underneath, and then filters over the torsion bar, and there's clips and so on to get it all lined up. And it takes a bit of fettling to just to line it up well, that both handbrakes both cables pull at the right strength and all of that good stuff. So just again, no specialist tools, nothing that's going to scare you. It just takes a little bit of time and effort to get these things set up once, but when it's done, it's done. And that was really the only pain for me on the brake system. I've actually got new front discs and new wheel bearings as well to go on it, which I still haven't fitted yet, but that's something that you just do bit by bit. I think the whole kit from Autodoc was 40-50 quid. Again, super cheap, super easy. So it's just sort of an afternoon's work if you want to get stuck in, which I've got to find. That leads us now on to sort of bodywork. The 924, most were, I believe, from factory half dipped, half galvanized. So they should, I say they should, generally be okay if they haven't really been abused. The main thing to look for, and I think this is sort of through the range of 924, 44, 68, is the seals. And, they're a structural element of the car. So making sure that they're solid, not hiding any rust spots, that's the main thing. But if they're in good condition, then generally just get those seals protected well, stone chipped and all of that good stuff, covering, and they'll do the job that they should do. And that really is the main piece to look for. Front and back, again, everything's so solid, and there doesn't and it really depends just on history and how badly the car may have been treated over its years, but they tend to be pretty good. I've seen ones that look horrific, and you just think, how the hell did that happen? I mean, it must have been sort of almost like stripped and sat outside for 20 years type thing, which I'm sure many have. But the main thing is just like the the floor pan, just making sure that's good. Just get your head into the wheel arches if you can. Get your head under the boot area just to make sure everything is looking solid there, and under the front of the front bumper area as well, because it's all part of the paneling in the front as well, because the bumper just comes off by itself, but then you're left with this metal structure. So all of that, just get your glasses on and get in there and just have a little poke around and make sure everything is as it should be. But overall, you'll tend to find that most have got the paint fades, lacquer peeling off if they were lacquered, and that's what mine was in. But mine was a solid base to start from, so that's what I needed it to be, because I knew I was going to maybe spend a bit of money just getting it repainted. So from that perspective, that's the main thing for me, is just make sure there's none of that crazy rust that's floating around. Finally, the interior. I think this one is really down to personal taste, because so many of these cars now are at an age where the original interiors potentially long gone, right? And people may have done a full trim rechange. They may have put the car into sort of race spec, and the interior's gone, and you don't know what it came with. Again, I've been pretty fortunate on this one, where I found an original interior that's not had any work done to it. That's both good and bad, because you've got the seats that have got the split between the leatherette and the cloth, but that's something I've covered many times before. But it's the original cloth, original colours it left the factory in, so that from my perspective is a really nice thing to see. Many cars won't have necessarily still had that originality to them, but that said, many will have ultimately gone through a retrim that could have been a retrim in the original colours and cloths. So I think if you got the houndstooth, which tends to be one of the most popular, and I think there's another one which is called like a pinstripe, those tend to be still readily available from the companies that will do reupholstering, retrimming in the Porsche communities, tend to be able to get that material quite freely. So if you're in that position with any of those, the houndstooth and the pinstripe, happy days. Yeah, honestly, I think mine is just a bit bespoke. The Porsche Scribe, or Porsche Script as they call it, it's just a pain, and you just can't find it anywhere to retrim. So anyway, that's another story. So yeah, interior wise, look, it's 70s 80s design, so it's very, very retro. It's super cool. I mean, I like the fact that not everything is perfect, like cars of today, where the fit and finish is absolutely pristine. Don't expect it with these cars. They're held together with the traditional screw methods. Clips of the day weren't really widely used, so everything's easy to take apart and investigate and have a look in. So changing steering wheels, looking at steering rack, changing the key chambers, and just the center dash and speakers, and just getting access to stuff is really easy, right? And again, it's just a bit of time. Taking the seats out, 4 bolts, all of this good stuff. The interiors are pretty cool to work on, so that's why they're quite popular with ultimately people wanting to change into race cars, because it's a day's work, and you've got the interior out, stripped, done, back to sort of the bare bones, and you're sort of ready to add your race kit, and off you go. So the 924 poses great sort of ease of use around the interior, and everything's where it should be, right? There's nothing that's a bit crazy. There's a couple of retro cool bits, like you got 4 sort of switches that sit in the center console just behind the gear stick, which do different bits and pieces, from rear wipers to spraying your lights and all of that good stuff. So there's some cool funky things. They generally come with electric sunroofs. Those sunroofs can be removed as well, so there's you can have a massive hole. They're very, very big. They're virtually the size of the whole of the roof, so that's pretty cool. Electric windows, electric door mirrors. So I guess quite a lot of the mod cons of the day. When you think most things were windy windows back in the day, and do the wing mirrors yourself. So yeah, and everything's where it should be and very easy to understand and read. So overall, the interiors are, a nice place to be. If you don't mind some of the 70s retro colours of browns and stuff. Browns and beiges, they tend to be quite sort of present as well. But overall, it's a nice place to be. So, the interiors are, like I say, quite robust. So I think that really sort of covers everything that the 924 poses as an entry to the Porsche brand if you are considering something that might be a bit of a DIY challenge ahead. Those are some of the areas that you might have to consider, and you're going to do a step-by-step, aren't you? You're not, I took 3 years, and I didn't think I'm going to sell this at the end of it, although that's something I'm considering at the moment, which I've said on previous podcast. And I learned a hell of a lot going through all of the steps of how things worked, how things were put together, where things that you want to improve are there to be improved, and just getting a feel for how the whole car's put together. And then once you've done all that, enjoying it. And I think that's the biggest highlight for me, and I think for so many classic car owners, is going through the blood, sweat and tears of bringing something sort of back to half decent life. And look, you don't have to do a full resto nut and bolt job on these things. You're going to spend as much money restoring fully a 924 as you are a 911, right? Don't think that because it's got a 911 badge or a 924 badge, they're going to be different to restore. They're not. It's going to be the same pain, the same challenges, whether you need paint work or engine work, body work, interior work. People who do these for, these areas for a living will charge the same money if you're going to ask them to do it, regardless of car. And, it's just something to have in the back of your mind as you go through these steps on what you want to put into it, and then ultimately what you want the car to be at the end of it. So for me, it was really about just getting reliability, getting an understanding for the car, being able to fix things that if they did break, I knew how to fix, and then just enjoying the experience of, something that you've brought back to a state that's reliable and fun to enjoy. So, taking it to car meets, going out for drives with friends in, their sort of cars, it ticks all the boxes. It was a bit of a journey. I didn't do it all at once. I didn't throw all the money in one big lump. I, spaced it out. But I'm now in a position where I've really, enjoyed the whole experience from end to end. And I really like talking about the 924, probably as you've seen in this podcast, no doubt. The fact I've got a YouTube channel on it, because I just think it's a really great car to open yourself to the Porsche brand, but equally the history of Porsche, because the 924, which I won't bore you with, but has an amazing story behind it, regardless of those who think it's a good or bad story. It truly is a great story and is a part of the Porsche history. So from that perspective, I do encourage any of you considering a 924 to, just get close to them, get a feel for them, get a chance to drive one, sit in one, tinker with one, and they are as rewarding as any other classic car from sort of the 70s, 80s era, if not better than most. And from that perspective, I would like to say a big thank you for staying with me on what has been quite a long journey, this one. This is, nearly an hour long, which is usually double the time that I take on these podcasts. But I hope you found that insightful. I hope that is sort of helped maybe some of the thinking that you may be going through if you are considering even a classic car of any sort, but precisely the Porsche 924. So thanks again for joining, thanks again for listening, and for following and subscribing to all of the various things that I put out there under Witty 924. Now going off to do some videos because I've got to do a bit of work on the 924, which I'll be posting very soon. So from that perspective, thanks again, and I will speak to you all again very soon.